Some nights look ordinary when they begin, and then somehow end up changing your whole life.
Hi, I'm Noah.
My name is Ethan.
Hi.
And if you had told me at 16 that one awkward school dance in a small Ohio town would lead me to the love of my life, I would have laughed and gone right back to trying not to be noticed. But that is exactly where my story begins.
Do not wash
Even
your
now,
hand.
all these years later, I can still see the gym lights reflecting off the polished floor and hear the cheap speakers doing their best to make everything feel magical. These days, I live in a quiet house just outside Columbus with the man I fell for long before I had the words to explain what I was feeling. Sometimes Noah is in the kitchen making coffee, wearing one of my old college sweatshirts like it has always belonged to him, and I look at him and think, it all started that night. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked me this morning, leaning against the counter with a smile that still gets me every time. I shrugged and said, "I was just thinking about the first time I saw you." He laughed softly. "At the dance." "Yeah," I said, "at the dance." I grew up in a town where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business by lunchtime. My dad worked long shifts at an auto shop just off Route 40, and my mom taught second grade at the elementary school I had gone to as a kid. We were not poor, but we were careful. We clipped coupons, drove used cars, and thought eating out at Applebee's counted as a special occasion. I was the quiet one in my family, the kid who kept his thoughts to himself and spent more time in the school library than at football games. By junior year, I had gotten very good at blending in. I had friends, decent grades, and a reputation for being dependable, which is a nice word people use when they do not know what else to say about you. The night of the school dance, I almost did not go. I stood in front of my mirror for 10 minutes, staring at a navy button-down my mother had ironed that afternoon, wondering if I could fake a stomachache believable enough to stay home. "You are already dressed?" My mom called from downstairs. "You are going." I grabbed my keys and muttered, "This is cruel and unusual punishment." When I got to the gym, the whole place smelled like punch, cologne, and floor wax. Couples were taking pictures near a gold paper backdrop, and someone from student council had strung up lights that made the basketball hoops look almost elegant. I remember standing near the refreshment table, holding a plastic cup and wishing I could disappear, when I heard a voice beside me say, "You look like a guy who is trying very hard to seem like he belongs here." I turned, and there he was. Brown hair, crooked smile, tux jacket hanging open like he had already given up on looking formal, and the kind of easy confidence I had only ever seen in movies. "I could say the same thing about you," I told him, surprising myself. He grinned wider. "Then maybe we should stick together." "Maybe we should," I said. He held out his hand like we were in some old black and white movie. "I am Noah." I looked at his hand for half a second before shaking it. "Ethan." And for the first time that night, I stopped wishing I was somewhere else. Noah did not let the conversation end after that. Most people in high school asked a question, waited for the shortest possible answer, and then moved on to someone louder or easier. Noah stayed. He leaned against the refreshment table, took a sip of the fruit punch, made a face like he regretted every choice that had brought him to that cup, and said, "This tastes like somebody melted a bag of candy into tap water." I laughed before I could stop myself. "That is probably exactly what happened." "Good," he said. I was worried my standards had gotten too high. There was something dangerously easy about talking to him. Within 5 minutes, he had asked me what classes I hated, whether I thought our school mascot looked more like a wildcat or a raccoon, and why I was standing by myself at a dance that was supposed to be fun. "Maybe I like observing people," I told him. "That sounds like something a future novelist would say." "I am not a novelist." "Not yet," he said with a small shrug. "You have the face of a guy who notices things." I had never been told that before. I had been called quiet, serious, shy, even weird once in middle school, but never observant like it was something worth admiring. "And what kind of face do you have?" I asked. He smiled without hesitation. "The kind that gets dragged into school events by my friends, and then immediately looks for the nearest exit." I glanced around. "So why are you still here?" He lifted his cup toward me. Because I found better company than the exit. If you are wondering whether I knew right then that Noah would matter to me, the answer is no. What I knew was simpler and somehow just as dangerous. I liked the way he looked directly at me when I talked. I liked that he waited for my answers instead of rushing in to fill every silence. I liked that when a slow song came on and half the gym groaned, he leaned closer and whispered, "If anybody asks me to dance, tell them I just joined a monastery." I nearly choked laughing. That is not how monasteries work. Shows how little I planned that lie. A few minutes later, one of Noah's friends called his name from across the gym. A tall guy in a gray tie waved at him and shouted, "You disappearing on us, man?" Noah looked over, then back at me. "Apparently I am being summoned." "You should go," I said, suddenly too aware that this had all been temporary, just one lucky stretch of time in a crowded room. But Noah did not move right away. "I have got a better idea," he said. "You should come with me." "To meet your friends? They are less impressive than I make them sound." "That is not exactly reassuring." He laughed. "Come on, Ethan. If this dance is going to be terrible, it might as well be terrible for both of us." I do not know what made me say yes. Maybe it was the way he said my name, like he had already decided we would know each other beyond that night. Maybe it was because 16 is an age when one small choice can quietly tilt your whole world. We crossed the gym together, shoulder to shoulder, and for the first time since I had arrived, I did not feel like someone standing at the edge of other people's lives. Noah introduced me to his friends like I belonged there. "This is Ethan," he said. "He is the only interesting person I have talked to all night." "That is a lot of pressure," I muttered. One of the girls laughed. "Do not worry. Noah says dramatic things when he is bored." "I am not bored anymore," he said. He said it lightly, but I felt it land somewhere deep in me. By the end of the night, we had talked about everything from bad cafeteria pizza to whether either of us would ever leave town. When the music finally cut off and people started gathering their jackets, Noah walked with me into the cool spring air outside the gym. The parking lot was full of headlights and voices and that strange sadness that follows any night you do not want to end yet. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and said, "So, Ethan, be honest, was tonight a total waste of your time?" I looked at him, at the crooked smile I was already starting to memorize, and said, "Not entirely." He grinned. "That is the nicest thing anybody has said to me all week." Then he pulled a black marker from his pocket, took my hand before I had time to think about it, and wrote his number across the inside of my wrist. "In case you ever need an expert opinion on terrible punch or fake monasteries," he said. I stared at the numbers, then back at him. "You carry a marker in your pocket?" Preparedness is an underrated quality. I should have said something clever. I should have sounded calm and unaffected. Instead, I just smiled and said, "Good night, Noah." He started walking backward toward a pickup truck parked 3 rows down. "Good night, Ethan," he called. "Do not wash your hand." I did not. The next morning, I stood in my bathroom staring at the black numbers on my wrist like they might vanish if I looked away for even a second. My mother knocked once on the door and said, "You are going to be late for school." I answered, "I know," but I kept looking anyway. It was ridiculous how much a phone number could matter when you were 16. By the time I got to school on Monday, I had already decided that Noah probably would not remember half the things he said that night. Maybe he was just naturally charming. Maybe he talked to everybody like that. Maybe writing his number on my hand had been a joke that only felt important because I wanted it to. I was halfway to my locker when I heard someone call, "Ethan." I turned so fast I nearly dropped my history book. Noah was standing by the row of science classrooms, backpack slung over one shoulder, smiling like seeing me there was the most normal thing in the world. "You washed your hands," he said, mock offended. I looked down automatically, and he laughed. "I am kidding. Mostly. I wrote it down before I did," I said. "Good," he replied. I would hate to think my dramatic gesture was wasted. He fell into step beside me as if we had been doing it for years. Do you always ambush people before first period? I asked. Only the observant future novelist. I told you, I am not a novelist. You keep saying that like you are trying to convince yourself. We reached my locker, and I fumbled with the combination because suddenly I was aware of everything. The hum of hallway voices, the slam of lockers, the fact that Noah was standing close enough to throw off my concentration. He leaned against the locker beside mine and said, "So are you texting me later? Or did I imagine us becoming best friends?" "Best friends seems ambitious." "All right then," he said. "Mildly important acquaintances." I finally got my locker open and shook my head. "You make a lot of assumptions." "I do," he said easily. "But I am usually right." That should have annoyed me. Instead, it made me smile. From that day on, Noah began showing up everywhere in my life with the strange consistency of someone the universe had quietly assigned to me. He found me in the lunch line on Tuesday and asked, "Are you really buying the meatloaf? Or is this some kind of cry for help?" On Wednesday, he dropped into the seat beside me in study hall and whispered, "Do you think Mrs. Pierce would notice if I replaced my economics notes with song lyrics?" On Thursday, he caught up with me after English and said, "My friends are going to a diner after school. Come with us. I need someone there with functioning taste in French fries." I had spent most of high school keeping my world small and predictable. Noah acted like none of that mattered. He talked to me like I was already part of his life, and after a while I started to feel like maybe I was. The diner became our place before either of us called it that. It was a little spot just off Main Street with red vinyl booths, crooked blinds, and a waitress named Donna who called every teenage boy honey and every teenage girl sweetheart. Noah always ordered a burger and stole half my fries even when he swore he was not hungry. "You know this is theft," I told him once as he reached across the table. "It is only theft if I do not make you laugh first," he said. Then he made a ridiculous face until I nearly choked on my soda, and somehow that counted as payment. There was an ease between us that I had never had with anyone before. He told me about his older brother away at college, his dad's obsession with yard work, the fact that he wanted to leave town one day but felt guilty even saying it out loud. I told him things too, more than I usually told anyone, how I hated pep rallies, how I secretly liked old movies, how sometimes I felt like everyone else had gotten a handbook for being young and I had somehow missed mine. "You always say things like that," he told me one afternoon as we walked out of school into the cool gold light of early April. "Like what?" "Like you are standing one step outside the moment and studying it while everybody else is just living in it." I looked at him. "Is that bad?" Noah shook his head. "No. It is kind of my favorite thing about you." That was the first time I carried his words home with me like they were something warm in my pocket. And even then, even with the long talks and the easy laughter and the growing certainty that my days were starting to bend around his presence, I still told myself not to read too much into any of it. He was my friend, maybe the best one I had, and that should have been enough. The problem was every day I spent with Noah made enough feel a little farther away. By the time spring started turning warm for real, Noah had become part of my routine in ways that felt small from the outside and enormous from where I stood. He was there at my locker before first period more often than not. He slid into the seat next to mine at lunch like it had been saved for him, and he had developed a habit of calling my house after dinner under the excuse of asking about homework he definitely understood better than I did. One Tuesday night, my mother picked up the kitchen phone, listened for 3 seconds, and then smiled in a way that made me instantly suspicious. "Ethan?" she called, stretching my name out just enough to make my ears burn. "It is Noah." I came into the kitchen trying to look casual and failed immediately. My mother handed me the phone and said, "He sounds very determined." "That is because he is annoying," I muttered. From the receiver, I heard Noah say, "I heard that." I turned away from my mother and lowered my voice. "Why are you calling? First of all, rude. Second, I need to know if you did the reading for American history, because I may or may not have forgotten there was a quiz tomorrow. You definitely forgot. That feels judgmental. I smiled despite myself and leaned against the counter. Chapter 8. Reconstruction. You are saving my life. That seems dramatic. I am a dramatic person, he said. You knew that at the dance. I stood there for almost 40 minutes, long after the history excuse ran out, talking to him about everything and nothing. When I finally hung up, my mom was drying dishes and pretending not to watch me too closely. He seems nice, she said. He is, I answered, maybe too quickly. She gave me a look that was not prying exactly, more curious than anything, but I looked down at the floor and said, he is just a friend. Even then, the words felt rehearsed, like something I was saying because I needed them to be true. At school the next day, Noah was waiting on the front steps holding 2 cups of vending machine hot chocolate. One of these is technically yours, he said, handing me a cup. Technically, I sampled it for quality control. And it is terrible, he said cheerfully. But it is warm. We sat on the low brick wall outside the main entrance before the first bell, our shoulders almost touching, watching students spill out of buses and cars into the bright chill of morning. Noah took a sip, made a face, and said, "Promise me something." "That depends. If we are both still stuck in this town at 30, we stage an escape. You and me."
No hesitaste.
I looked at him over the rim of my cup. That is a very specific age. It feels old when you are 16. Everything feels old when you are 16. He laughed softly. True. Still, promise me. All right, I said. If we are both still here at 30, we leave. He held out his hand like he had at the dance. Deal. I shook it, and for some reason that simple little promise lodged itself in my chest. Around Noah, I was learning how quickly ordinary moments could start to matter. A Friday afternoon in the diner, a 10-minute walk after school, a shared look across the hallway when someone said something ridiculous in class. None of it looked dramatic from a distance, but inside me, something steady and irreversible was taking shape. The problem was that the more important Noah became, the more careful I became too. I started noticing every accidental touch, every compliment, every moment he looked at me a second longer than necessary, and then I would spend hours convincing myself not to assign meaning where there was none. That became the exhausting rhythm of my junior spring, feeling everything, saying nothing. One Saturday in May, Noah asked if I wanted to come over and help him study for finals. You mean watch you avoid studying for finals? I corrected. That is still a kind of help, he said. His house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees, the kind of place where bicycles were left in driveways and neighbors waved from porches. His mother let me in with a warm smile and pointed upstairs. He is in his room pretending to work, she said. That sounds accurate, I replied. Noah's bedroom was a mix of half-finished homework, stacked baseball magazines, and the clean laundry he had clearly not put away. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a textbook open in front of him. You made it, he said. I considered leaving when your mom warned me. She likes you. She has poor judgment. No, he said, looking up at me with that familiar crooked smile. I think she has excellent judgment. I sat down across from him, and for one suspended second, the room went very quiet. Sunlight came through the blinds in thin gold lines, striping the carpet between us. Noah kept looking at me in that open, unreadable way of his, and I had the strange, dizzy feeling that something was changing, not all at once, but enough to be felt. Then he blinked, tossed me a notebook, and said, "All right, tutor. Save me from failing algebra." I caught the notebook and laughed, but some part of me stayed in that quiet second, turning it over and over, wondering what he had almost said, and what I was getting more afraid to ask. By the time finals ended and summer started pressing its heat against everything in town, Noah and I had fallen into a rhythm so natural that I stopped noticing how unusual it might have looked from the outside. He showed up at my house with no warning and a grin like he had every right to be there. I texted him whenever something funny happened, and he answered like he had been waiting for it. We spent long afternoons at the diner, slow evenings walking neighborhood streets while porch lights flicked on one by one, and entire Saturdays doing almost nothing in particular except being in the same place, which somehow always felt like enough. One afternoon in June, we were sprawled on the grass behind the town library, hiding from the noise of a summer baseball game at the park across the street. Noah had one arm under his head and was staring up at the sky like it had personally disappointed him. "I cannot believe this is what freedom feels like," he said. "Bug spray and humidity?" I asked. "Exactly. We survived 10 months of school, and this is our reward." I laughed and took a sip from my soda. "You are impossible to impress." "That is not true," he said, turning his head toward me. "I am impressed by very specific things." "Like what?" He looked at me for half a second too long. "Like people who do not need to talk all the time just to fill space." My heart did that annoying thing it had started doing around him, skipping once and then pretending nothing had happened. "That is a very strange compliment." "It is still a compliment. I will take it under consideration." He smiled, then reached over and stole my soda from the grass beside me. "Hey," I said, "that was mine." "Past tense," he replied, taking a long sip. "You are a thief, and yet you keep spending time with me. Maybe I have terrible judgment." Noah handed the cup back, our fingers brushing for just a second. "No," he said quietly. "I do not think that is it." Moments like that had started happening more often. Small shifts in the air between us that were easy to dismiss if I wanted to, but impossible to completely ignore. A hand brushing mine and not pulling away fast enough. A silence that felt full instead of empty. The way Noah looked at me sometimes, like there was something he was trying to decide whether to say. And maybe the hardest part was that for the first time in my life, I was not only afraid of wanting too much. I was starting to be afraid that maybe I was not imagining all of it. Late one Friday, Noah called my house after 10, which was unusual even for him. I picked up on the second ring and whispered, "If this is about homework, I am hanging up." He laughed softly. "It is not about homework." I sat up in bed, glancing at the glow of my alarm clock. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," he said, though he sounded thoughtful, not casual. "I just could not sleep." "That makes two of us." There was a pause on the line, but it was not awkward. With Noah, silence had stopped feeling like something that needed fixing. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You usually do. Do you ever feel like you are waiting for your real life to start?" I leaned back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. "All the time." "Me too," he said. "Sometimes I look around this town and think, there has to be more than this." "There is," I said, more certain than I felt. "How do you know?" he asked. I hesitated, then answered honestly, "Because I have to believe there is." He let out a slow breath. "You always know how to say exactly the thing I am thinking." "No, I just say the weird thing out loud." "Maybe that is the same thing." We stayed on the phone until almost midnight talking about college and leaving and fear and all the things boys in our town were not really supposed to admit scared them. Before hanging up, Noah said, "Do you know what my favorite part of the last few months has been?" My throat tightened for no good reason. "What?" "You," he said simply. Then, as if he had not just tilted my whole world with one word, he added, "Well, and fries, but mostly you." I laughed because I did not know what else to do, but after we said goodnight, I lay awake for nearly an hour replaying his voice in my head. A few days later, our town held its annual summer fair, the kind of small-town event with a Ferris wheel, fried food, and booths run by churches trying to make everything wholesome. Noah and I met there just before sunset, and the evening felt dipped in gold from the start. He won me a cheap stuffed bear at a ring toss booth after missing so badly on the first 5 throws that I could barely stand from laughing. You are making this very hard to romanticize, I told him. He held out the tiny blue bear with exaggerated dignity. I am giving you a treasured prize, Ethan. Show some respect. It has one eye lower than the other. That is what gives him character. We walked the fairgrounds carrying lemonade and talking over the noise of kids and music and carnival rides. At one point, we stopped near the Ferris wheel and watched the lights blink on against the darkening sky. Noah stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat of his shoulder through my shirt. You know, he said, quieter now, I think this might be one of those nights I remember when I am old. I turned to look at him. Because of the fair? He shook his head and gave me a smile that was gentler than usual, less joking, more real. No, he said, because of who I am here with. For a second, the whole world seemed to go still around that sentence. The music, the crowd, the spinning lights, all of it faded behind the sound of my own pulse. I wanted to say something brave, something honest, something that would match whatever was happening in his eyes. But before I could, someone from his baseball team shouted his name from 20 feet away, and the moment broke apart. Noah looked over his shoulder, then back at me. Do not go anywhere, he said. I will be right back. I nodded, but as I watched him jog toward the noise, laughing when one of his friends shoved his shoulder, I felt something new settle into me. Not just longing, not just fear, but the quiet, undeniable realization that my life had already started changing, and the center of that change was him. After the fair, something shifted between us in a way I could feel everywhere, even when Noah was not around. It was in the pauses that lasted a little longer than before, in the way his voice sometimes dropped when he said my name, in the strange new awareness I carried into every conversation like I was holding something fragile and bright that might break if I moved too fast. The trouble with realizing you have fallen for someone is that once you know, you cannot unknow it. Every look starts to mean more. Every ordinary moment becomes loaded. And every silence begins to feel like a question. A few nights after the fair, Noah showed up at my house just after sunset with a basketball tucked under one arm. Come outside, he called from the driveway. I stepped onto the porch and looked at him. That depends. Are you planning to humiliate me? Absolutely, he said, but in a supportive way. I laughed and followed him to the cracked hoop over our garage, where the air still held the heat of the day and cicadas buzzed from the trees like the whole town was plugged into one low electric hum. We played badly on purpose, or at least I did. Noah had a decent jump shot when he was not trying to make me laugh by narrating every move like it was the final seconds of a championship game. Ethan goes left, he announced dramatically, dribbling in a wild circle. He is thinking, calculating, probably judging me, in 12 different ways. I am mostly judging your footwork, I said, stealing the ball and taking a shot that bounced off the rim. Rude, he answered. I opened my heart to you. When it got too dark to see the lines in the driveway clearly, we sat down on the warm concrete and passed a bottle of water back and forth. Noah leaned his elbows on his knees and stared out at the street, where porch lights glowed soft and yellow. Can I tell you something without you making it weird? He asked. That depends on how weird it is to begin with. He smiled faintly. Fair. I just mean, promise you will not look at me like I have lost my mind. No promises, I said, but my chest tightened anyway. He was quiet for a second. Lately I feel different around you. I stopped breathing for what felt like a full minute. Different how? Noah picked at the label on the water bottle, not looking at me right away. I do not know. Not bad different. Just, when something happens, you are the first person I want to tell. When I have a terrible day, talking to you fixes part of it. When something is good, it feels better if you are there. My heart was beating so hard it almost hurt. I forced myself to sound normal when I said, that just sounds like friendship. Noah finally turned toward me then, and there was a softness in his face I had not seen before, something unguarded. Maybe, he said quietly, or maybe it is something I have not figured out yet. There are moments in life that come without warning and divide everything into before and after. Sitting in my parents' driveway with the summer dark around us, Noah saying that in a voice barely above a breath, was one of them. I looked down at my hands because looking straight at him felt impossible. You do not have to figure it out all at once, I said. I know, he answered. I just did not want to pretend with you. That sentence settled over me with a weight that was somehow both terrifying and hopeful. We did not say anything for a while after that. A car rolled by at the end of the street. Somewhere a dog barked. The porch light above us buzzed softly, and then Noah said, almost like he was talking to himself, "Sometimes I think I met you at exactly the right time." I swallowed hard. Why? He gave a little shrug, still not looking away from me now. Because before you, everything felt kind of flat, like I was just doing what I was supposed to do. School, baseball, friends, plans. Then you showed up, and suddenly things started feeling real. I could not remember the last time anyone had spoken to me like that, with that kind of quiet sincerity, like the truth mattered more than sounding cool. You make things feel real for me too, I admitted. Noah smiled, but it was not his usual grin. It was smaller, almost amazed. Yeah. He nodded once, slowly, as if that answer meant more to him than I understood. Then he stood and held out a hand to pull me up from the driveway. His fingers closed around mine, firm and warm, and neither of us let go right away. We stood there in the half-dark, too close to pretend not to notice it, both of us breathing a little unevenly, both of us balanced on the edge of something new. Noah glanced down at our hands, then back up at me. I should probably go home, he said, though he made no move to leave. Probably, I said. But you are not moving. Neither are you. A laugh escaped me, soft and nervous. That is because I am trying very hard not to ruin this moment by saying the wrong thing. Noah took a small step closer, close enough now that the world seemed to narrow to his face, his eyes, the sound of his breathing. Maybe there is not a wrong thing, he said. I do not know where the courage came from. Maybe it had been building all summer. Maybe it had started the night of the dance and simply taken this long to reach the surface. But I looked at him and said the truest thing I had ever said in my life. I think you matter to me more than anyone else. Noah's expression changed, not with surprise exactly, but with relief, like a door had opened that he had been standing in front of for a long time. Good, he whispered, because you matter to me that way too. For the next few days, everything between Noah and me felt brighter and more fragile at the same time. Like we had stepped into a new room together, and neither of us wanted to move too quickly in case the lights went out. Nothing dramatic happened right away. We still met at the diner, still walked after dark, still called each other for reasons that had nothing to do with homework. But now every word carried an extra layer under it. Every glance lingered longer, and every silence felt less like uncertainty and more like possibility. On Monday afternoon, Noah slid into the booth across from me at the diner and pushed a basket of fries toward the middle of the table. I am making a decision, he said. That already sounds dangerous. I have decided, he continued, ignoring me, that you are a terrible influence on me. I looked up from my milkshake. Because I make you eat fries? Because I think about what you say after you say it. I smiled despite the heat rushing into my face. That sounds exhausting. It is, he said. Do not get smug about it. Donna came by with a coffee pot and looked between us with a smile that felt too knowing. You two want anything else, honey? Noah glanced at me. I am good if he is. It was such a simple sentence, but it landed inside me with surprising force. I am good if he is. It sounded like trust. It sounded like the beginning of a habit. It sounded dangerous in the best possible way. As summer deepened, we started finding excuses to be alone without ever saying out loud that that was what we were doing. We drove out to the edge of town one evening and sat on the hood of Noah's truck watching the sky go pink over open fields. Another night we walked the track behind the high school because it was one of the few places that felt quiet after dark. We talked about college and leaving and who we thought we might become someday. But under all those conversations was the same unspoken truth, that whatever this was between us, neither of us wanted it to disappear. One night on the track, Noah stopped walking and looked out across the football field, empty under the stadium lights. Do you ever think about how weird it is that people act like everything important is supposed to happen later? He asked. Later when? Later when we are older. Later when we leave. Later when we know more. He shoved his hands into his pockets and shook his head. What if some of the most important things are happening right now, and everybody is too busy pretending they are kids to admit it? I looked at him at the seriousness in his expression and said, I think some people know that. I just think they are scared to say it. Noah let out a soft laugh. That sounds like us. Maybe a little. He turned toward me then, and for a moment I thought he might say something bigger, something that would change everything all over again. Instead, he smiled and said, You always make me feel less crazy. That is because your crazy is manageable. That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. The truth was, I was happier than I had ever been, and that happiness came with a quiet fear I did not know how to put down. Small towns have a way of making everything visible. A glance too long in the hallway. A changed routine. Two boys spending more time together than people expect. No one had said anything outright, but by the last week of July, I had started catching certain looks from people we knew. Nothing cruel, nothing direct, just curiosity sharpened into something that made me more aware of where we stood when we talked and how often Noah's name came up in my house. One evening, while I was drying dishes after dinner, my father said, almost casually, You and that Noah kid sure spend a lot of time together. I kept my eyes on the sink. He is my friend. I know, my dad replied, and his tone was neutral, but that was almost harder. Neutral left too much room for interpretation. Just seems like a good summer for you. It is, I said quietly. Later that night, I met Noah by the track again. The air was thick and warm, and the field lights cast long white stripes across the bleachers. He took one look at me and asked, What happened? Nothing happened. Ethan. The way he said my name made lying feel impossible. I exhaled and sat down halfway up the bleachers. Noah sat beside me, knees angled toward mine. My dad mentioned you, I admitted. Was it bad? Not exactly. I stared out at the empty field. It just made me realize people are probably noticing things. Noah was quiet for a second. Do you want me to back off? The question hit me harder than I expected. I turned to him immediately. No. Then do not say it like that, he said softly. Like what? Like you are already bracing to lose me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and there was no teasing in his face now, none of his usual easy deflection. Just honesty, just care. I do not want to lose you, I said. Noah nodded once, slowly. You are not going to. I wanted to believe him without reservation, but belief is harder when you are young and everything you love still feels one step away from being taken. How can you know that? I asked. He leaned back against the bleacher seat and looked up at the lights overhead before answering. Because I am still here. Then he looked at me again, and his voice gentled. And because whatever this is, I am not walking away from it just because it scares me. That sentence settled into me like something solid, something I could stand on. I let out a shaky breath and said, You make it sound simple. It is not simple, he replied. It is just worth it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The stadium lights hummed overhead. A late summer breeze moved through the metal rails with a hollow, quiet sound. Then Noah held out his hand between us. Not dramatic, not hidden either. just there. An offering. A choice. I looked at it for half a second and then took it. His fingers closed around mine, steady and warm, and the fear inside me loosened just enough to let something stronger rise in its place. Hope. After that night at the bleachers, Noah and I stopped circling around the truth and started living inside it. Quietly at first, carefully, but honestly with each other in a way that changed everything. We did not suddenly become fearless. We were still two boys in a small Ohio town, still figuring out what this meant and what it might cost, still learning how to hold something precious without crushing it under the weight of our own worry. But something had settled between us now. We were not guessing anymore. We were choosing. A few evenings later, Noah picked me up just before sunset and drove us out past the edge of town, past the gas station and the soybean fields and the old church with the peeling white paint, until the houses thinned out and the sky seemed to get bigger. He parked near a gravel overlook above the river, cut the engine, and sat there for a second with both hands still on the steering wheel. "You are very serious all of a sudden," I said. "That is because I have something important to say." "That sounds alarming." He turned toward me, and there was a nervousness in his face that I had almost never seen before. It made him look younger and older at the same time. "I keep trying to figure out the perfect way to say this," he admitted, "and every version sounds fake in my head." I waited, my pulse climbing. Noah let out one quick breath and shook his head. "So I am just going to say it badly. That sounds more like you." He smiled at that, but only for a second. Then his expression softened. "I do not want to hide from what this is with you." The air inside the truck seemed to go still. I kept my eyes on him and said nothing, because I could already tell he had more to say and I wanted every word. "I know we are young," he continued. "I know we do not have everything figured out. I know this town is what it is and people are what they are. But when I am with you, I feel more like myself than I do anywhere else. And I do not want to act like that is nothing." My throat tightened so fast it hurt. Outside, the river moved below us in the fading light, steady and silver. "It is not nothing," I said quietly. Noah looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at me. "Good, because I like you, Ethan. Not in some vague, maybe sort of way. I like you in the kind of way that makes everything else feel less important." I laughed then, partly because that sounded exactly like Noah, and partly because if I did not laugh, I thought I might stop breathing altogether. "That is still one of the most dramatic things anyone has ever said to me," I told him. "I am trying to be sincere. You are succeeding." He held my gaze. "Then tell me I am not alone in this. There are moments when your whole life seems to gather itself into a single answer." I had spent months trying not to want too much, trying not to name what I felt in case naming it made it impossible. But there, with the sun dropping behind the trees and Noah looking at me like the truth mattered more than being safe, I did the only thing I could do. "You are not alone," I said. "I like you too. More than I have known how to say for a long time." Something in his face eased instantly, like he had been carrying a weight I had only just learned was there. "For a long time," he repeated. "Do not get smug about it." "Too late," he said, smiling now, real and bright and relieved. "I am already unbearable. You were unbearable before this." Fair point. We sat there for another second, both smiling in that stunned way people do when hope turns into something real. Then Noah reached across the center console and took my hand, slowly enough to give me time, gently enough to ask instead of assume. I let my fingers settle into his without hesitation. He looked down at our hands and then back at me. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now?" I repeated. "Now we probably panic in a very organized way." Noah laughed, the tension finally breaking. "That does sound like us." Then his voice softened again. "No, really. What do you want?" It was such a simple question, but no one had ever asked me that in this part of my life. Not like it mattered, not like the answer could shape the world instead of just fitting inside it. I looked out at the river, at the last line of gold on the water, and then back at him. I want us to be honest with each other, I said. Even when it is hard. I want this to be real, not something we pretend did not happen later. Noah nodded before I had even finished. Yes, he said immediately. That too. All of that. He squeezed my hand once. And I want to be the person you call first. For good news, bad news, stupid news, all of it. My smile turned helpless. You already are. He blinked, and for once Noah Carter, who always had something to say, seemed briefly speechless. Well, he said after a moment, that was disgustingly sweet of you. You brought us to a river overlook at sunset. You do not get to complain about sweet.
I absolutely do.
It is part of my charm. By the time he drove me home, the sky was dark and my entire life felt rearranged in the quietest, most permanent way. Before I got out of the truck, Noah caught my wrist lightly and said, Ethan. I turned back. His expression had gone serious again, though there was warmth all through it now. I meant what I said. I am not walking away from this. I believed him, not because I thought life would suddenly become easy, and not because I thought being young meant we could promise forever without ever being tested. I believed him because Noah had never once made me feel like I had to earn his honesty. I know, I said. I am not walking away either. He smiled then, and it was not flashy or joking or careless. It was the kind of smile that stays with you. Good, he said softly. Then I guess this is really happening. And for the first time in my life, the future did not feel like a place I had to survive until I reached it. It felt like something opening. The truth is, life did not suddenly turn into a movie after that. There was no perfect music playing in the background. No magical moment where every fear disappeared and the world rearranged itself to make things easy for two 17-year-old boys in a small Ohio town. What happened instead was something quieter and, in the end, more meaningful. Noah and I kept choosing each other, day after day, in all the ordinary ways that matter most. Senior year came faster than either of us was ready for. The leaves turned, college applications took over our kitchen tables, and everyone around us started talking like life was a train already pulling out of the station. Where are you applying again? Noah asked one afternoon in the diner, tearing apart a paper napkin while I looked over a stack of forms. Ohio State, maybe Indiana, maybe Michigan if I feel brave, I said. That is not maybe brave. That is definitely brave. What about you? He gave me a lopsided smile. I was thinking about Ohio State too. Seems irresponsible to let you escape all alone. I looked up at him. That sounds suspiciously like a plan. Maybe it is. His voice softened just a little. Maybe I got used to you being part of my future. That was how it kept happening with us. Not with grand speeches every week, but with steady sentences that built a life one brick at a time. Part of growing up with Noah meant learning that love was not only the dizzy moments, the river overlook, the hand reaching across the dark. It was also late-night phone calls while studying for chemistry, sitting 3 rows apart at school assemblies and still finding each other in a room full of people and saying, "Text me when you get home." So often it became a kind of prayer. There were hard moments too. Conversations we had to stop when someone walked into the room. Careful choices about where we stood and who might see us. The occasional comment from classmates that made both of us go quiet for a while afterward. But even in those moments, Noah never gave me the feeling that I was something he needed to hide from himself. Once, in the parking lot after school, I asked him, "Do you ever wish this was easier?" He leaned against his truck and thought about it for a second. "Of course," he said. "I wish the world was easier on a lot of things." Then he looked at me with that same steady honesty that had first undone me. "But I have never wished it was somebody else." I carried that sentence with me for years, maybe forever. We both got into Ohio State. When the letters came, Noah drove straight to my house without calling first, ran up the porch steps 2 at a time, and held his envelope in the air like he was about to announce lottery numbers. "Tell me right now," he said. "Did you get in?" I held up my own letter and said, maybe. He narrowed his eyes. Ethan. I smiled and opened the
door wider.
Come inside, Buckeye. He stared at me for half a heartbeat and then broke into the kind of grin that starts in the eyes before it reaches the mouth. You got in. So did you. I got in. We were both laughing by then, both talking over each other, and my mother, who had been in the kitchen, put a hand over her heart and said, I do not know what is happening, but I am assuming this is good. It is good, Noah said, looking at me in a way that made the room feel full of light. It is really, really good. College did not solve everything, but it gave us room. Room to grow, room to breathe, room to become more fully ourselves without every moment feeling watched. We got an off-campus apartment by junior year with thin walls, bad heat, and exactly one pan that did not stick. Noah learned how to make coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I learned that he still stole fries even when we were paying for groceries together. Some things changed. Some things never did. We studied, worked part-time jobs, argued over whose turn it was to do laundry, and slowly built a life that stopped feeling hypothetical. Years passed the way they do when you are busy living them. Graduation. First jobs. A tiny apartment in Columbus. Better jobs. Hard seasons. Good seasons. Bills. Grocery lists. Burnt toast. Sunday mornings. Real life, in other words. And somehow, through all of it, the thing that had started as one electric conversation by a punch bowl kept becoming something deeper and steadier and more true. This morning, Noah stood in our kitchen in that old college sweatshirt and asked me why I was looking at him like that. I told him I was thinking about the first time I saw him. He laughed and said, You still think I was charming, huh? No, I said, walking over to him. I think you were trouble. He smiled, set his coffee down, and slipped an arm around my waist with the ease of a person who has done it so many times it has become part of both our bodies' memory. And yet, he said, and yet, I repeated. Then he kissed my forehead, quick and familiar and full of all the years between then and now. If you ask me what changed my life, I could tell you 100 things. Leaving home, growing up, learning who I was, building a future I once thought only happened to other people. But if I am being honest, it started much earlier than that. It started with a gym full of bad music and cheap punch, with a boy who looked at me like I was worth noticing, with a hand extended across the space between strangers. Some people spend their whole lives searching for the kind of love that feels both exciting and safe, the kind that starts your heart racing and then teaches it how to rest. I met mine when I was 16 years old. He is in the kitchen right now asking if we have any more coffee filters, and I still know, with the same certainty I did not yet have words for back then, that the best thing that ever happened to me was meeting Noah before I knew how much one ordinary night could hold.